Hey there, welcome to episode 13 of the Open Floor podcast. I'm Ali Mosalleh.
And I'm Aryan Narayan.
And we are here with the third episode of the season. We have a really special episode set up for today, so I won't take much time to set it up. However, today's episode relates to our presidential election and a mock debate. Without further ado, on to the episode.
The past few weeks have been incredibly tumultuous across America, as President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have made their cases to the American people as to why they should be elected to the highest office in the land.
Yeah, for sure. Mail-in, absentee, and early voting have been occurring in many states for a couple of weeks already, and pre-election day ballot counts surpassed a total of 100 million votes already, shattering all previous records.
Now, today is November 3rd, 2020, and it's finally time for Election Day, which may just turn out to be the most important election in American history. However, there is definitely a chance that the day comes and goes, and we don't know who the next president of the United States will be, due to the large amount of early voting in the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic.
To commemorate this special day, we decided to create an equally special episode. We'll be conducting our own mock presidential debate, which we designed to closely emulate the first presidential debate that occurred between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden earlier this year.
Today, our participants will be Akshay and Rohan Balachander. And welcome to the podcast. But before we can begin, could you please just introduce yourselves to our listeners today?
Thank you, Ali and Aryan. My name is Rohan Balachander. I am a junior at Lexington High School, and I would describe my political leanings as a social democrat, so definitely pretty left-wing.
Thanks to both Ali and Aryan. My name is Akshay Shah, and I would describe my leanings as definitely center-leaning right. Not a full Republican. I don't like to think of myself like that, but definitely right-wing, leaning right, definitely.
All right, so our first question is going to be on the records of President Trump and Vice President Biden. So when a president seeks a second term, it's generally a referendum on the record. But Vice President Biden likes to quote one of his dad's sayings, which is, "Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative." And in this case, Biden is the alternative to our current President Donald Trump. Looking at both of their records, I'm going to ask each of you, why should voters elect your preferred candidate over the other? So Rohan, you will start off our mock debate with this question, 1 minute uninterrupted.
All right, thank you, Ali. So basically, in my view, Donald Trump has been a failure of a president. He has done much harm to the American people. For example, he's slashed taxes for the rich, leading to less revenue, but continues to spend a lot on, our government continues to spend a lot, leading to a large deficit. However, Biden promises to increase taxes on the wealthy and spend more funding on social and economical issues rather than the military. Trump has also left the Iran nuclear deal, abandoning the Kurds and allowing Iran to receive nuclear weapons, and has raised tensions by killing Soleimani. He has failed to come up with a solution for the Affordable Care Act. Is trying to cut healthcare for 20 million Americans, but has no possible new plan to help cover. Urge Ukraine to investigate opponents while withholding aid for the government. That was a clearly illegal, and what he did got him impeached justifiably. Then the coronavirus, he's downplayed the virus, flaunted regulations.
Thank you. That's 1 minute.
Over 230,000 Americans have died. So.
Right. So now, Akshay, 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. For sure, President Donald Trump, he's definitely not the best. But in this election, I think I'd pick him over Biden. On his record of foreign policy, he pulled us out of the Paris agreements, which were literally just a piece of paper. Nobody respected them on the international stage. India and China both grew worse in this last decade, and it was really just a restriction on U.S. jobs. I think there's much better ways to go about protecting the climate than, sealing ourselves off like that. On the topic of COVID-19, I think he did stumble a bit in the beginning, but as we see now, he has plans in place such as Operation Warp Speed. The HHS and the CDC working together are all working on finding a cure and then distributing out to America on large. Um, yeah, on foreign policy, I think I think the most important thing he did was take steps towards repealing the Affordable Care Act, which I think it was a failure. I think it could have been done much better. I think healthcare should be subsidized like that, and I think for all these reasons that
All right, thank
he
you.
should be elected.
Yeah, and so now open discussion. You have 3 minutes. You can answer to whatever each other said. So go ahead.
Sure.
For sure, Rohan, you can go first.
All right, thank you, Akshay. Just to continue on some other failures of his, he has encouraged the rise of far-right groups and white supremacy, including his famous "good people on both sides" when discussing protesters and counter-protesters in Charlottesville. He does not take global warming seriously and left the Paris Accords, and has rolled back climate regulations for corporations, which has encouraged global warming or climate change to occur at a much faster pace. He pays almost no taxes, $750 in that New York Times report, which is unbelievable. I have friends of mine who work minimum wage jobs, like a couple hours every week, who paid more in taxes than him. He's pushed away our allies and spends more time being friends with North Korea, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. He's put children in cages, removed from their parents, and in my mind, that's just a complete failure.
I think on the topic of children in cages, the Obama administration did way more to limit did way more to to halt immigration than he did. I think the cages themselves were built under the Obama administration, under Obama's secretary. So,
well, to that point, I would respond that the cages in Obama's administration were not actually intended to separate children and put them in there. They were used for a completely different purpose than Trump's, which was specifically to separate children from their parents and keep children in cages. And I think at least 6 or 7 children were reported to have died in U.S. custody as a result of his policy.
I think I agree with that. I think we definitely need to rework how we deal with immigrants at the border. But on the topic of separating children from their parents, we do the same thing domestically. When children are deemed to be in unsafe situations, they're removed from their parents and processed separately. What's more unsafe than taking your children on a 1,000-mile trek up to the United States border in a country and then trying to cross illegally, because that's why they're there.
Well, it's not like these people have much of a choice in their home countries. Due to U.S. foreign policy, it is very unsafe. There's a lot of gang violence, and the regimes themselves do not have fair democratic governments. They persecute minorities and other people, and these people do not willingly choose to go 1,000-mile journeys, uprooting their entire lives and their entire culture to go to a place they've never seen unless they feel that is absolutely necessary. And these parents have chosen that because they know that they cannot survive in their country. It is too unsafe, it's unstable.
But again, there are legal
and
channels
they go
of
to America.
immigration. There are ways to apply. There are ways to get in that don't
Right,
involve
and these people
crossing
come
the border
to the border
at night.
and apply for immigration, which is allowed in the current policy.
Right. I think you have merit in your argument. I think that the way we deal with our border needs to be reworked. Although I do think that the whole separating children from their parents isn't as radical as it's made to seem. Like, we do the same thing domestically when children are put in danger.
But that is when parents are abusing their children, not what's happening here.
But it's done domestically, so no, I see your point. Moving on, on the topic of foreign policy, I think his foreign policy record has been amazing. I think he's made leaps and bounds. He's made NATO start paying their NATO the agreement that we're in, the organization that we're in is basically comprised of all of Europe and us, and we've been paying more than our fair share. I think something like 60-70% of NATO's defense budget, for so long, and I think he's made those European countries start finally like standing on their own feet. I think
I will agree with you on this. This is where I probably differ in most Democrats. I don't understand why we're allowing these European countries to benefit from our military, and I feel that they should be paying their fair share as well.
for sure, for sure.
So,
And it brings up a question to my mind, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, so I'm asking you, um, do you think that these European countries are allowed to have free healthcare? Not allowed, but they're able to allowed to have free healthcare and healthcare subsidies because we're paying most of their defense budget?
I'm not positive that I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but I will say I'm not sure that they will have to spend so much that they won't be able to afford
All right,
healthcare.
so that's for this section. We're going to move on to our next section. Orin, you can take it away.
All right, thank you for that. Now let's move on to the topic of the Supreme Court. So recently, President Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett towards the end of September to succeed the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the court, and in fact, the Senate confirmed her to that position. Trump mentions that the Constitution is clear that he is obligated, and the Senate is obligated, to consider a nominee to the court. However, Vice President Biden says that this is an effort by the president and Republicans to jam through an appointment in what he calls an abuse of power. Whose argument do you think you agree with more? And do you think it was the right decision to go ahead with the appointment of Justice Barrett right before the election? Akshay, you can take this question first. You'll get 1 minute uninterrupted.
Thank you. So the Constitution says that the president has the power to appoint judges and that they would go through the Senate. Um, the power doesn't just, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the power fades away before the election. And it's not meant to. The president can appoint a judge up until the last day he's in office. Whether or not that judge goes through, however, is a different matter. For example, when Obama tried to appoint a judge and the Senate majority back in, was it 2015 or 2016? I don't remember. They denied that judge, but the going through of a judge isn't guaranteed. Since we had a Republican majority and a Republican president, Amy Coney Barrett was appointed. Obama, on the other hand, had a Republican majority Senate, but he was a democratically elected president, and his judge appointee actually was a liberal-leaning judge. So I think there are two different cases. I think it's not out of Trump's reach to appoint a judge, and I think what he did was constitutional. Whether or not it was right is a different question, but I think it was right as well.
Now, Rohan, you can go ahead with 1 more minute.
So, I I'm conflicted on this. So while I understand the view that Republicans have been playing dirty politics for a while now, especially with the case of Merrick Garland and here, it is well within their power, and Akshay is right in that the president can appoint whoever he wants whenever he wants. Um, and honestly, I blame this one on the voters uh, for not showing up because elections matter and elections have consequences. And when you don't show up in 2010 or 2014 or 2016, uh, a lot of Democrats did, this is the result. And that um, is the result is that the Republicans can block whoever they want and whenever they want, and they can appoint whoever they want whenever they want if they have control of the presidency. The one thing that irks me, of course, is that Mitch McConnell refused to allow Obama's centrist nomination. Merrick Garland was a compromise, uh, but because his claim was that you shouldn't do it on an election year, but here in this instance, he forces a judge through with a week left before the election. Um, but again, it's within his power, and
All right,
elections matter.
thank you, Rohan. So now you guys will have 3 minutes to discuss together, and you can ask and answer any questions you have.
Okay, well, I definitely didn't know that Mitch McConnell's reasoning was that it was in an election year. I think that politics is full of hypocrisy. I think, however, Amy Coney Barrett is she's an originalist judge. She studied under or she clerked under Scalia, and yeah, I think that it made sense for her to be appointed. I think that if there had been a Democratic majority in the Senate back in 2016 or 2015 or whenever the election year was, then Garland would have gotten in. And I think it's just another thing that happens. I think, yeah, it depends on the voters. If voters don't show up, then this is what happens.
I will say a lot of people have been talking about Amy Coney Barrett, and while I do wish they had picked someone who had a little more experience as being a judge in the lower courts, I'm not even sure if I'm not sure exactly how much, but I've heard that she has less than usual. That thing is, Obama also nominated a justice who was confirmed, Kagan, who had very little or none uh, experience in the in the lower courts. Uh, I will say the originalist, um, how do you say, classification, I guess, of Amy Coney Barrett. She is a bit odd. She's been a little strange when she's been asked questions that should have a clear answer, such as like challenging the election and whatnot. She has given a roundabout answer because she knows that in order to be confirmed, she has to play
Well,
politics towards both sides.
I
And
mean,
I will say that's something I don't like to see
should I
when
respond or?
I
Okay,
don't
sorry.
like to see. Yeah, sure, sorry. I don't like to see when judges are
Yeah, I
supposed
mean,
to
if you go
be
back to Bader
apolitical.
Ginsburg's appointment and her confirmation hearings, and most of the confirmation hearings from the last few years, last 20, 30 years, you see that all the judges do this. And this is what I fail to understand is how is it worse that Amy Coney Barrett is doing it? Because in order to be a judge, you need to play impartiality. You need to be impartial. Because if you're given any reason, if the Senate is given any reason to suspect that you're going to be impartial, which you might be, which you might not be, it doesn't, we don't know. But if the Senate is given any reason to suspect impartiality, then you won't be appointed. And if you have your leanings and you have leanings that, influence the way court decisions will be carried out, then of course you have to play impartiality. Like back in the 80s or 90s, whenever Ginsburg was appointed, she was deemed as a radical feminist judge. But if you go back to her confirmation hearing, she's very neutral. She always says, "No, I don't have an opinion on that. I have to be impartial. I have to be impartial." Like that sentiment is repeated over and over. I will say one thing about Coney Barrett, though. I don't like her stance on LGBTQ issues. I don't like that she's been part of that People of Prayer um, organization on like LGBTQ issues. I don't like her track record for personal reasons.
I would agree with that, obviously. And similarly, I would disagree about her view on abortion. But again, there's not much to do about it. She's been appointed. And I guess if we could transition slightly to the discussion of,
All right, yeah, I'm
if
sorry, I'm
that's
gonna have
okay
to
with the
cut you off
moderators,
there. That was a
discussion
great
of,
discussion, though. So I'll leave
all
it to
right,
Ali now to move on to our next topic, which is of utmost importance right now in America and across the world.
All right, so this is of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I believe you guys were discussing on a bit before. So the country is heading into a dangerous new phase, right? More than 47,000 Americans are in the hospital tonight with COVID-19. And since the beginning of the pandemic, 231,000 Americans have died from this deadly virus. So please be specific. How do you think the coronavirus pandemic should be handled? And why do you think your preferred candidate would be a better leader than the other in this nationwide crisis? Rohan, your turn first. 1 minute uninterrupted.
Thank you, Ollie. So this is a topic in which I think Trump has especially done terribly, as I mentioned in my intro. 230,000 Americans are dead. He downplayed the virus, flaunted regulations. Uh, One point that they often, the other side being conservatives, often make is that he locked down China. But in the time since, 40,000 people still came from China to the U.S. I think in the 2 months after. American nationals who came over were not quarantined. He suggested injecting bleach and hydroxychloroquine. He has indoor rallies, at least two, which, according to a recent Stanford study, has caused over 30,000 new cases of coronavirus in the U.S. The Biden plan, he has downplayed testing as well, whereas the Biden plan is encouraging doubling the number of testing sites, as well as testing much more, investing in rapid and at-home tests, ramping up production of masks and face shields, uh, creating and investing in a 25 billion vaccine production and distribution plan. also protecting vulnerable populations such as the elderly and people of color who are disproportionately affected by this virus, and restoring
Yeah,
the
I will
task
let you
force
continue that during the
for
discussion phase. However, now
virus.
Akshay, up to you.
Thank you. So, I think it's important to note that yes, the Trump campaign has done, I think, spectacularly bad with COVID. I think they've done really, really just it is something to be marveled at that 200,000 Americans have died. I think it's a tragedy. I do think that the pandemic is it's a serious issue. Um, as to the plans on how to deal with it, I think that the Trump administration has started administering Operation Warp Speed, and basically the timeline for which is as of today. Um, as of October 9th, the HHS announced an agreement with a biotech company called AstraZeneca for late stage development and large scale manufacturing of AZD 7442, which is a hypothetical vaccine that could be coming out. I don't know about its reliability. I know that they have been testing vaccines and different products that could have been vaccines since March. I think that we should have, as Americans, we have a very, I don't want to say phobia, we have a fear of giving up our freedom.
Yep.
We have,
All right. So we'll open it up now for discussion. 3 minutes. Go ahead.
yeah, I think we have a phobia of like giving up our freedom, like that the government is going to come and like become a tyranny and this and that. Some of it is valid, some of it isn't, and I think in this case it wasn't valid. It really isn't valid. I think that a lot of freedom is having to know when to like give. I don't want to say give up pieces of it, but like sometimes it's for a greater good. The lockdown was for a greater good. The the quarantine is for a greater good. I think people just need to realize that and not just say no because the government is saying it.
And to add on to that, I'm not really sure how people think their freedoms are being violated. Um, the Constitution gives us the rights to free speech and all that, but in a national emergency such as this, I think you're justified in telling people stay
Well, I
home,
think
don't
a lot
come
of
out
it
and
is small business owners.
interact.
Small business owners have been hit the hardest during this pandemic because they don't have like bailouts to rely on. They don't have the sheer wealth of like massive corporations. They've been hit the hardest. And yeah, along with that, I think it's people who are upset about that. People who are upset about their businesses going down. People who are upset about like in rural areas where there aren't many customers anyways, and now with the quarantine there are none. They're like dying out. We're losing small businesses in America. So I think that's what they've been upset about. That's what yeah, freedom of movement too.
Yeah. So
You go.
just to circle back again, Trump disbanded the coronavirus task force. And even there was a tweet I remember seeing by Biden in early, like I think it was November 2019, saying that Trump was defunding our resources to prepare for epidemics such as this, and Trump actually pointed it out and made fun of him, saying like, "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Uh, Nothing like that would happen," and it did, and we are feeling the effects of it. We have done the worst probably out of any country in the world when it comes to this virus. We have like 4% of the population, of the world population, yet we have the most cases in the entire world. And yeah, I think Biden will do a much better job, and I think he will bring some rationality to
hmm
this.
I just want to
And
make
yeah,
one comment quickly before we end this segment. It's lots of the Democratic electorate didn't want Biden beginning. All the way back in the primaries, I remember there was lots of support for Bernie. There was lots of support for Kamala Harris, even some for Klobuchar. I think it's important to note that I'm not. I don't fully support our president. I don't support everything he does. I support the party ideals which he stands on. If there was someone else running, I would have picked them. But as it stands, as a center right leaning person, I would have to pick President Trump over Biden.
All right. So this concludes our section on COVID-19. I'll pass it over to Aryan for the next section.
Yeah, our next section is directly related to the handling of the pandemic, and that's the state of our economy. So, due to the pandemic and due to having shut down the country for the most part for months now, the economy has faltered greatly. Unemployment has risen. Um, you've seen businesses shuttering, and you've seen people unable to get the money that they need to live. So, what are your thoughts on the state of the US economy, and why do you think that your preferred candidate and their plans are better suited to help it recover from the effects of the pandemic and even help it grow past that? Akshay, you can have the floor first, and you'll get 1 minute.
I think the economy is something that we need to focus on right now. I think that we need to we need to reopen. I think the quarantine has lasted for a while. I think that we've in the beginning we didn't know exactly what this virus was. We didn't know what its not intentions. We didn't know what the consequences of it would be. But now we've sat through it for 8 months, and I think we're ready to reopen. Social distancing, masks, all of that. I think we need to still continue the quarantine of the most vulnerable, populations. The demographics who are the most at risk, like the elderly. We need to keep them away from the virus. We need to the sickly, those who already have lung issues, respiratory issues. They also need to be quarantined. But I think the rest of us need to start reopening and get the economy flowing again, because there's only so long you can keep it closed and expect no pushback. There's only so long you can keep it closed and expect no repercussions down the line.
Thank you, Akshay. Rohan, you can have your minute now.
Um, so I was going at this question from a slightly different angle than Akshay, which was Trump's response has been to push $1.5 trillion into the stock market rather than into the pockets of uh, everyday Americans. This has caused a huge uh, gap in between how the rich are feeling this pandemic and how the poor are. Um, so even as everyday Americans haven't had a stimulus check in months, April 13th was when they began releasing stimulus checks, which means for people who haven't been able to find jobs, I think it was roughly they've been living on something like $5 a day, which is not livable. So by investing instead in the stock market, this has only been benefiting the rich investors rather than the everyday Americans. Biden will raise taxes on the rich, force them to pay more, fund the government better, and work on infrastructure. I know Trump has a plan as well, but Trump has not been taking climate change seriously. Biden will look towards greener energy resources. Uh, just to show Trump's lack of handling. Manufacturing was already in a recession
All
before the
right, thank you,
pandemic last
Rohan. I'm
year.
going to have
It
to
was
stop you
shrinking
there,
by
but
something like
feel free
2% per quarter.
to continue with that in the next 3 minutes of the discussion period.
So also Biden wants to raise minimum wage, which would directly put money into the working class people. And Trump wants to continue Reaganomics, the trickle down politics, which have not functioned and have continuously led to market crashes every
I agree with
8 to
this.
10 years. So yeah.
I'm not a Republican per se. I call myself more of a libertarian. I don't think we should be putting money into Wall Street. I think that corporate bailouts are are probably one of the worst uses of money that we had during this pandemic. I don't think corporations deserve to be bailed out. I think that if you can't survive on your own, then you don't. In terms of corporations, I think that if a corporation can't survive on its own, it doesn't deserve to be funded by the government. I think that the government should, yeah, redirect its money towards public infrastructure, stuff like that. Even such a stimulus check, which normally I would be against because it would be some sort of UBI, universal basic income sort of thing, which typically a libertarian would be against. But in this specific case, I'd have to support it because people have been struggling. People do need money, and people are getting laid off because of this pandemic. Although instead of redistributing money like that, I would say that reopening the economy would be better. Again, like the selective reopening, letting people without lung conditions, without who aren't elderly, who aren't like the most at-risk demographics, letting them back in and letting them restart their businesses and go back to work and go back to school and stuff like that. Well, not school, but like go back to work, stuff like that.
Uh,
Um,
I'll
mhm.
point out
No, go
this.
ahead. I was finished.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I? Okay. Um, so there was a recent-ish NPR article that compared the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and Minnesota allowed reopening to occur weeks before Wisconsin, but the economy did not seem to have any boost in Minnesota versus Wisconsin, and the conclusion was likely because high-income folks were able to work remotely and they could self-isolate, and then the people themselves were forced to spend all of their goods with small businesses being closed on the large businesses. So Walmart and Amazon felt a large amount of growth in their sales, but none of the small businesses really managed to thrive. And I think honestly, we have to just we I would agree with the sentiment of trying to open up the economy, but keeping people safe. But at the same time, this virus is more than just the death rate. There's a larger percentage of people who have permanent heart damage, lung damage, and that we don't even know the effects of this virus 10, 20 years down the line. We've only seen maximum like 1 year,
Yeah, I
not
think
even.
that's true. I think in the point of reopening the economy, it's very easy to crash the economy by closing suddenly, but I think in reopening it'll take some time to see, you know, to see things rise again, But yeah, I think also in the point of, Amazon and Walmart, these corporations employ millions of people. And I think if some people can go back to work for Amazon or Walmart, and if there's social distancing, they're wearing masks, I think that that should be allowed. I think it's a shame. I think it's a genuine shame that all these small businesses have closed in the face of the pandemic. I see the reason for it, but I still think, America is supposed to thrive on the entrepreneur. I think that in closing down for so long, we've lost a little bit of that. I see the reason for it, but I also see the opposing side.
All right, thank you to you both on your thoughts on the economy, and we'd like to move to our final topic now, and I'd like to turn it over to Ali now.
Right. So our final topic today is going to be on race and violence in our cities. So Vice President Biden says that President Trump's response to the racial violence in Charlottesville 3 years ago, when he stated that there were very fine people on both sides, was what directly led him to launch this run for president. In contrast, President Trump has often said that he believes that he has done more for black Americans than any other president, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. My question for the both of you is why should voters and Americans in general trust your preferred candidate rather than his opponent to deal with the prevalent racial issues facing this country over the next 4 years? Rohan, you can go first. 1 minute uninterrupted.
So I'm just going to start this off by saying it's not like Biden is perfect. He has had what I would call a pretty racist past in his support of the 1994 crime bill and his general law and order rhetoric in the 80s. But he has gone back and said disagrees with what he said at the time, and he regrets saying what he said. Not to mention the crime bill was, I think, completely bipartisan and there was not a single member in Congress who went against it. Moving on, Trump has constantly demonstrated his racism. The Central Park Five, claiming that the five men should receive the death penalty when it was clear that they were not guilty. His birthism, claiming that Obama was born in Kenya, not here. His calling of Mexican immigrants as rapists, bringing drug and crime, calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, obviously as a jab for her
All right.
Native or lack
I'm
of her
sorry to
Native
interrupt, but
American
all right.
history,
So let's
depending
move
on
on
who
to
you ask.
Akshay.
I think on the topic of racial issues, both candidates have a lot lacking. Yeah, Trump's comments at Charlottesville, very fine people on both sides. I think that was pretty. I think it was something that we shouldn't glorify. You know what I mean? I think that it has leave it out of all the things that the media is focused on. I think that that one comment has received the correct amount of demonization. It is pretty awful. Um, Race and violence in our cities. I think that after the recent George Floyd occurrence and the Breonna Taylor occurrence, I think that race has become a much bigger problem in the United States than it used to be. I know that a very big criticism of conservatives is that Black Lives Matter, but only every 4 years. I think that I think that, the concept of Black Lives Matter is a good concept. I don't like the politics attached with it. I do think the police should be demilitarized. I do think that they should have, greater restrictions in order to become a police officer. I don't think you should just come right out of high school and get handed a badge and a gun. I think, this is where I'll agree with the Europeans that we should have a college course for our police. Police should have college degrees and should be trained in combat reduction. I don't think their first reaction should be to just shoot the problem. But yeah, I think that would be my statement.
So, all right, now the floor is open for 3 minutes. Go ahead.
So, just to continue, his whole law and order rhetoric, basically posing to white suburban people how, these people of color are going to come, these thugs are going to come and ruin your neighborhoods and, go back to where you came from when the people were from like New York, the congresswoman. So on the topic of looting and rioting, Biden has said time and time again he is strongly against looting and rioting. These outside agitators who see the opportunity, to come and start burning things, they're not representative, I feel, of the majority of protests. I think something like 96% of Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful. Biden has supported protesting versus Trump's reaction to peaceful protesters, where he tear gassed them and had his forces shoot rubber bullets at them for a photo shoot at a church to demonstrate virtue signaling his Christian beliefs or whatever. I just feel like Biden has not encouraged white supremacy like Trump has, and Biden has continually promised to do actions that will benefit the black community far more, such as bringing working class people out of deep economic troubles and preventing them from being swallowed by poverty.
Yeah, I think it's a very contentious issue. I personally think that both candidates both have their flaws. Again, I support Trump basically solely because he's a Republican. There's genuinely a lot about the man that I don't like. Many of the points that Rohan has said, I agree with. But, in a partisan election, you pick the one who you align with, or the one whose party believes you stands upon your party.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was supporting Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren during the primaries, but when it comes down to it, even though I wish Biden were a little more left-leaning when it came to economic issues and such as like healthcare and stuff like that, and also things social issues, I will stand by him because I believe he's going to right the ship that Trump has led us down. We right the path that Trump has led us down, and try and fix the mess that he's made, rebuild trust with our allies, improve our economy, and recover from this pandemic.
All right. So with that, we conclude our mock presidential debate today. So thank you to both Akshay Jha and Rohan Balachander for participating in today's debate. It was honestly really great hearing how you guys felt on all these really important issues, and we are happy that we could showcase the diversity in opinions.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for having me. I think that
Thank
this
you,
election
Aryan.
is
Thank you, Aryan.
it's a lot more dividing than it should be. I think that lots of relationships, families are very divided over what's going to happen in a few hours, and I think that it's really nice to be able to sit down with a few friends and talk about it, and
Yeah.
leave it for the world to see that you don't have to be enemies, that if you're on different parties.
For
So
sure.
thank you for the opportunity again.
Of course. Of course.
I feel the same. I would like to thank you guys both for letting me come and speak about, and debate Akshay. There's actually a lot of things I would say I would agree with Akshay, especially in the earlier parts of the debate. And then there's some parts where we had our differences, but I think we both care about, this country and
Yeah,
want to see
that's
it
true.
move in the right
And
direction.
not only your opinions, but also the opinions of the millions of other Americans, right? So today, election day, by the time this episode comes out, probably election day is over. However, there are so many more elections in the future that that are just as important as the presidential debate every 4 years. So, just for our listeners, if you live in America and you are eligible to vote, we suggest you do, because that's how you can bring change to our nation. Also, fight for what you think is right. No matter your political orientation, your voice has the ability to cause massive change. And once again, thank you guys for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Open Floor.
Please follow us on whatever platform you get your podcasts from. A full list of where you can find us is available at openfloor.me/listen.
Additionally, please follow us on Instagram at Open Floor Podcast or on Twitter at The Open Floor for updates on whenever we upload a new episode and much more.
Consider supporting the podcast by visiting our new and improved website at openfloor.me. I'm Ali Mosalnei,
And I'm Arya Narayan.
and we'll see you in the next episode of Open Floor.